China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken say progress is made during their positive talks in Beijing, putting ties between the world's largest economies on a more stable footing.
Our other headlines: China's premier in Germany looking to boost trade with Beijing's biggest European export partner, with Ukraine also on their agenda.
Costing the Earth, the human, environmental and economic toll on Europe from climate change. New warnings for the fastest warming continent.
And 5 people dead, dozens of others injured. Violent clashes as Israel's military raids Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. China and the United States have committed to stabilizing their rather difficult relationship at the end of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to China. China's President Xi Jinping says there was progress in the talks.
Those discussions have restarted top-level diplomatic communications between the world's two superpowers. Blinken said both sides were open to further talks, but major differences remained. Our correspondent Dong Shui reports.
Well, Secretary Blinken has finally managed to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping this afternoon, and according to the official readout, President Xi reiterated the clear position from the Chinese side, and he said the two sides have agreed to follow through the common understandings between President Xi and Biden had reached in Bali last November. He said, and I quote, "State-to-state interactions should always be based on mutual respect and sincerity. I hope that Secretary Blinken, through this visit, could make positive contributions to stabilizing China-U.S. relations." And earlier in the day, senior Chinese diplomat Wang Yi had also met with the Secretary Blinken, when Wang Yi underscored the deep challenges in overcoming the mistrust and friction that has come to characterize the relationship. Wang blamed Washington's wrong perception of China as the root cause of the decline in the two sides' relations, and demanded the U.S. to stop suppressing China and interfering in its internal affairs.
Well, that's the view from Beijing. Let's talk to our correspondent John Tarrant in New York. John, Biden's packing his bags and leaving China. What are they going to make of this trip in the United States?
Yeah, well, I think the thaw that President Biden talked about in Hiroshima at the G7 a couple of weeks ago is on. But hold hard, because we have a long way to go. We are certainly not there yet. But I tell you, a major signal was the fact that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, met with President Xi in the course of business on Monday, and the two talked about stabilizing relations. For the world to see that, I think, is very important, and that in and of itself is probably progress. And it's important to remember that back in 2018, when Mike Pompeo was President Trump's Secretary of State, he went to Beijing and did not meet President Xi. So I think there's a very big difference this time round. Now, President Xi talked about progress. Not entirely clear to me what he meant by that, but he went on to say that he's looking forward to a sound and steady relationship with the United States. He thinks that both parties can overcome their various difficulties, but he did warn Antony Blinken not to hurt China's legitimate rights and interests. Earlier in the day, Antony Blinken met with Wang Yi, who is these days China's most respected diplomat, and we now know that on Sunday he spent 8 hours with Qin Gang, who used to be the ambassador to Washington, D.C. and is the new foreign minister. Well, 8 hours is quite a lot of time, including a dinner when Blinken arrived on Saturday night. So they clearly got through a lot of work. But here again, a caution for you, because one of the things that Qin Gang said to Antony Blinken is that Taiwan is the danger point in all of this. And as you know, part of this trip is to avoid any kind of conflict between China and the United States over the issue of Taiwan. But one thing's for certain, based on everything we know, it appears to pave the way for more very high-level politicians from both countries to travel to each other's capitals. Jamie and Juliet?
John, positive optics being briefed on both sides, but no breakthrough as anticipated.
Yeah, it was never really on the cards. The State Department gave a gaggle to journalists before Blinken left at the weekend, and they pretty much said as much. Very, very low expectations in terms of any headline-making extraordinary breakthroughs. But the point is, these two countries, the two biggest economies in the world, remember, are showing the world very publicly, including those countries in the region that also want better relationships with Beijing, but can't because America's relationship has been hobbled. They're really keen to see what happens here, and President Xi demonstrated his intention by turning up at that meeting on Monday with Antony Blinken. Now, the thing about diplomacy is it takes a long time. You can't just turn up in someone's capital city, click your fingers, and everything will change and everything will be all right. And that is a point that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, made himself in his news conference after meeting with President Xi and before departing China airspace.
In terms of those objectives that we set for this trip, establishing open communications channels, directly raising issues of concern, exploring cooperation in places where it's in our mutual interest to do so. We did all of that on this trip, but progress is hard. It takes time, and it's not the product of one visit, one trip, one conversation. My hope and expectation is we will have better communications, better engagement going forward.
Now, what Blinken is really saying there is that neither leader, not Joe Biden or President Xi, wants to be seen to be caving or accommodating the other's ideals. Not just yet. It's too soon in the new relationship for that to happen. But President Xi is also looking for a warm welcome in San Francisco in November, when he will likely attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders Summit. And I think that part of the visit by Antony Blinken today was to smooth the way for President Xi, so that when he comes here, he will actually get a warm welcome. But the chasm between these two is enormous. Tariffs, export controls, fentanyl, and human rights are just some of the issues that still divide them. However, both sides in this meeting have shown that they are aware that we have two different systems, one in Beijing, one in Washington, D.C. There are always going to be differences, but they are moving forward bearing those differences in mind. And that, I think, probably is a success and is a change. One last thing I think is important to understand. Everything that China wants, export controls released, tariffs released, all of that kind of stuff, will have to go through the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, most likely first of all. And there, I'll tell you, there is still a lot of opposition and suspicion about China, despite this meeting in the last 2 days. Jamie and Juliet?
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. Well, Dr. Hui Yawang is founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. I asked him for his take on this meeting.
I think this is a very significant move, actually, given the 5 years' time. The first American Secretary of State come to Beijing, and also usher in a parade of high-level visit that we expect in the next 6 months. Before we get into the G20, before we get into the APEC summit. So there's a golden opportunity now for the next 6 months that we can see a window of opportunity to stabilize this constant deteriorating Sino-US relation, as we put it in a historical low, actually, in the last 5 decades. So this is a great momentum to really come, to stabilize, to discuss, and also to warm up somewhat. I mean, if we can stabilize and lift somewhat, that, I think, the success of this visit has been achieved, because this is going to trigger in more high-level visit, more exchanges, more tourism, more flights increase, and also more people-to-people exchange, particularly business exchanges. We already see business leaders coming to China around this visit. For example, Bill Gates was in town on the same time. We see Elon Musk was here, and of course, J.P. Morgan have a 2,500 business gathering in Shanghai, and all those shows that the businesses can't wait. So I think this is very good. But then, once we have those high-level visits, then we can have a more whole society approach to happen, and that's really, I think, the significance of this visit.
As you said earlier on, this is the first in-person meeting for absolutely years. Let me ask you, how important is face-to-face meeting in international diplomacy? Pressing the flesh and looking someone in the eye.
Absolutely. It's so important. You know, I can give you a personal experience because we actually, CCG, my think tank, we went to US, Europe, Asia last year during the peak of the pandemic. We find that face-to-face meeting is worth 1,000 words. And particularly, you know, we're having 2 summits coming up. And, you know, I mean, our working level, you know, just like as President Biden, President Xi instructed, they should really get engaged and have the dialogue and actually, you know, pave the way for the high-level summit. So I think those face-to-face meetings, your smile, your eyeballs to eyeballs make a huge difference. You know, I mean, a handshake and a gesture of a meal of you know, exchange together, it means tremendous, much more effective than Zoom, or just or talking over each other over the space. That's very crucial. I think that's exactly what needed for foreigners to come to China and see is believing. China still functions, still working. You know, still projected by World Bank, IMF, about 5-6% of GDP growth for 2023. And this is the market that the whole world cannot neglect. And the whole world needs China. You know, both European Union, ASEAN, African, Latin American, all the countries, Middle East, wants U.S. and China to talk. As you said, 2 largest economies cannot really isolate from each other. We have to accept our parallel growth. We cannot change each other, but let's you know, make an acceptance to each other as time goes on and build new understanding and convergence on that.
China's Premier Li Qiang is holding talks with the German government in Berlin on his first overseas trip since taking office.
Trade and the war in Ukraine are expected to dominate the discussions with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Germany is China's biggest export partner in Europe. Beijing is keen to develop stronger ties. The 2 sides will also discuss global issues like the fight against climate change and the war in Ukraine.
Our correspondent Peter Oliver is in Berlin. Peter, good to see you. Now, what's in it for China and what's in it for Germany as these governmental consultations take place?
Right, well, the talks between the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Premier Li Qiang have actually just got underway right behind me. Premier Li Qiang just arriving with his motorcade seconds before I've come to speak to you. What they will be looking for really comes down to a number of things. Trade from the German side is so important. It's very important to China too, but specifically for Germany. We're in a recession here at the moment. China is Germany's biggest trading partner. Trade between the 2 countries worth $320 billion last year, up 21% on the previous year. It does look like China will be Germany's biggest trading partner again this year. For the Chinese side, what they're looking for is potentially a partner in Europe from Germany. It's not that everything is rosy between Berlin and Beijing, but when it comes to a relationship built on those strong trading principles, well, there's a framework there. There's a foundation that can be built upon. And that's something we've heard Olaf Scholz talking about already today. So perhaps that's something we'll be hearing more about over the coming days as well.
Peter, Li Qiang has been meeting business leaders as well in Berlin. He's going to meet more of them in Munich. What more do we know?
Right, we've heard from the Federation of German Business. Now, they're the ones that represent the big beasts of German business. You're talking about your Bayer, your BASF, your BMW, Mercedes, VW. Basically, if you can name a German company, they represent them. They talked about decoupling, the idea of decoupling a German economy from China, saying it was unrealistic and it would be harmful. It would be catastrophic for the German economy if that was ever to be really considered, if anything is a prospect. It's not going to happen, and what we have seen is, in fact, we're probably going to see more ties between German business and China. In fact, Li Qiang's visit here to Germany isn't just for the big political discussions that are going to be taking place on Tuesday. He's also heading down to Munich, where he'll be meeting with the CEOs of some of those German blue-chip companies. Expect to see more big deals signed. Expect to see more and more billions of German investment into China coming up in the coming years, months and weeks.
Peter Oliver in Berlin, thank you.
Italy has restricted China's Sinochem from taking further control of the tyre-making giant Pirelli. Sinochem, which has a 37% stake in the company, is now barred from increasing its holding in this firm or choosing its chief executive. Giorgia Meloni's government says it invokes so-called golden power rules to protect technology, which it claims has national strategic importance.
The Financial Times is reporting that AstraZeneca is planning to list its China business in Hong Kong. It would make the Anglo-Swedish drug maker one of the many multinationals considering such a move, hoping to protect their business from growing friction between China and the West.
Cathay Pacific Airways wants to recruit more cabin crew from the Chinese mainland to improve its Mandarin language services. The airline also said current staff would be given culture training. This all comes after 3 flight attendants were fired for making disparaging remarks about non-English speaking passengers, prompting criticism on social media.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the world's biggest international aerospace event is back on in France after a 4-year break. The Paris Air Show next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Now, the world's biggest international aerospace event is back on in France after a 4-year break.
The Paris Air Show is taking place against a backdrop of the war in Ukraine and industry efforts to cut carbon emissions. President Emmanuel Macron flew his green colours, arriving in a helicopter, partly using sustainable fuel.
Multi-billion-dollar deals are expected, but the spotlight will also be on whether the sector can keep up with demand.
Our correspondent Ross Cullen is at Le Bourget in Paris. Ross, good to see you. Now, there have already been some big deals being signed.
Yeah, they have. Airbus 500 planes. Indigo, the Indian airline, has signed that deal. They would like 500 planes from Airbus. We understand $55 billion is the size of that deal. Looks to be the biggest airline deal on record if the terms and conditions are all agreed between the two sides. You can see some of the aeroplanes behind me here at Le Bourget, which is normally a private jet airport. The main passenger airports in Paris are Charles de Gaulle and Orly, but this one, Le Bourget, is where the Paris Air Show takes place every 2 years. 2019, and it was meant to be on in 2021. But of course, the coronavirus pandemic put an end to that. So this is the first Paris Air Show since 2019, since before the pandemic. And so there has been a lot of focus on trying to continue the recovery in the aeroplane market. What is also notable is that this is the first Paris Air Show that we've seen since the war in Ukraine began. And there was a Ukrainian delegation here on the ground a little bit earlier on, meeting some of the sides, because we do have public sector and also private military contractors here. The US firm Lockheed Martin was showing off its F-35s pretty noisily with an aerobatic display a little bit earlier, but there were also French Air Force Rafales flying through the skies, and that is something that Ukraine has been asking Western allies for to try to continue the fight against the Russian invasion, looking for more investment in terms of the military supply for Ukraine's air force. And so that is something that was certainly discussed here. Lots of missile defense systems to try to take down Russian attacks on Kiev, lots of air defense systems. There were also all sorts of different missiles on display. So a real defense side to this air show, as well as the private sector and deals such as the Airbus one.
So while the aerospace firms are filling up their order books, there are also lots of questions about the industry's green credentials, emissions targets and climate change, also a big focus for the aviation sector.
Yeah, it's such a problem for the aviation sector to try to hit its carbon emissions targets, real polluting sector, but they are trying to make strides. We are seeing a lot of electric vehicles here. We were looking at some vertical takeoff and landing aeroplanes earlier, all powered by batteries. They are really trying to show that if they are still using jet fuel, it is the most efficient version of jet fuel, biofuel if they can as well. So they are trying to make strides in certain terms of different engine types or how your plane is being powered. We can listen in now to a little bit more of what the Sustainable Aviation Policy Manager, Matteo Mirolo, had to say.
We cannot just look at the technologies to decarbonize aviation. We need to look at the energy demand. We need to look at how much we're able to produce. And the more aircraft you sell, the more the energy needs. In 2050, if the aviation sector continues to grow in the way it has over the last decades, you would need 25% of the total European electricity production to go to aviation. And that's a huge number. It's quite unrealistic to think that's possible.
So lots going on. We've got the whole defence side with the Air Force and the war in Ukraine. We've got the private sector deals like Airbus and Indigo. We've got the ongoing fight to try to battle rising carbon emissions and bring down those CO2 emissions, driving for carbon neutrality. Also, just generally for the Paris Air Show, they are very positive and very pleased to be able to get back up and running again. 300,000 people are expected here. It's going to last all week. And as you mentioned, President Macron was here to officially inaugurate it this morning.
Ross Cullen in Paris on the outskirts of Le Bourget, thank you very much. US President Joe Biden is expected to announce a $600 million funding package aimed at tackling the climate crisis. The White House says the president will discuss his administration's historic action during a visit to a wetlands conservation area in the Californian city of Palo Alto. Biden's expecting to attract younger voters in the 2024 presidential election.
The UK's first deep geothermal energy project in almost 40 years has started operation. Housed at the Eden Project, an ecological tourist attraction in Cornwall, it'll tap into hot water reservoirs almost 5 kilometres underground to heat nearby greenhouses. Officials at the Eden Project say it should cut energy bills by 40%. The scheme comes as interest in geothermal energy is growing as the UK tries to reach its net zero goals.
170 people have been killed in India's heat wave. Temperatures in the states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have soared as high as 45 degrees, with high levels of humidity. The region's also suffered power and water outages. People over 60 are being advised to stay indoors.
So climate change taking a major human, economic and environmental toll on the fastest warming continent in the world. Europe has been warming by twice the global average since the 1980s. That's according to the World Meteorological Organization and the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service. The report found that last year Europe was around 2.3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level used as a baseline when measuring climate change. Well, let's take you on to the next slide. And the record-breaking heat stress was the main driver of excess deaths in Europe, with more than 16,000 fatalities last year attributed to the high temperatures. Around 67% of climate change events were flood and storm-related, racking up economic damage of around $2 billion. But there is some good news in all of this gloom. For the first time last year, more electricity was generated by wind and solar than by fossil fuels. Renewables provided more than 22% of the EU's electricity, overtaking fossil fuel, which made up around 20%. Well, let's talk now to Dr. Eleni Myrovili, Global Chief Heat Officer for United Nations Habitat, which promotes the development of environmentally sustainable cities. Dr. Eleni, welcome. For those of us who are non-scientists, this is slightly baffling because, according to this report, Europe is heating up faster than other continents. How so?
Well, thanks for having me. Climate change doesn't affect the whole globe on the same level. So like we have sea level rise at different levels depending on where we are on the planet. So other parts of the planet have more sea level rise, so other cities are more in danger than some. It's the same with heat. Some parts of the globe are heating up much faster, and these have to do with large meteorological phenomena, which have to do with the jet stream in the Atlantic Sea and how the different type of fronts hit different parts of the globe. And it seems like Europe is taking up the brunt. As you said, it's heating up twice as fast, and even though the global average of temperature that we have climbed since the pre-industrial era is around 1.2 degrees Celsius right now, in Europe last year we reached 2.3 degrees Celsius average. These are annual mean temperatures.
Is this fixable, or is it too late? I mean, how much time do we have if it is fixable?
Well, you know, the reports from the international organizations and the IPCC have been really more and more alarming every year, and they say that we still have time to change, even though we haven't been doing as well as we should have. Like, for example, you said that 22.3% was the amount of EU electricity produced by renewables, while 20% was from fossil fuels. But we have set a target in Europe to reach 42.5% by 2030, and we're already in 2023, and we have reached only 22. We should be doing much better. We've done like half what we should have done up to now. So the hardest, it's easier in the beginning. It's easier when we first put the solar panels and the wind turbines and the hydroelectric and all that kind of stuff. So the first 40–50% of renewables that we put in our energy mix are the easiest one. Then it gets harder and harder, and we have a slope ahead of us, and we have to do it really fast.
It's perhaps
because we're heating up really fast, and people are dying.
It's perhaps understandable that people will be angry with big companies, corporates, and with governments. What can we do, if anything, as individuals to improve the situation?
Well, I think that at this point, as far as mitigation is concerned and CO2 emissions, I mean, we can all try to do better. We can fly less, take international trips less, or we can use our cars less, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, we really need bold movements and bold decision in the way that our governments are moving forward and the way that we are approaching development. We really need to move away from fossil fuels. But the other side of it, which is the part that I'm most concerned about, is the adaptation side and building resilience to the already extreme weather phenomena that are hitting our populations, and making sure that we can protect them. And you know, we always think of the global south as really where they are being hit the worst, which is absolutely true. It's always it's always the most socioeconomically kind of marginalized people that are the most vulnerable. But this is true also in our cities in Europe, for example. There's always populations that are suffering from energy poverty, or populations that are on the verge of extreme poverty, or homeless, or immigrants that are living in really bad conditions. Or, as you said, older people that live alone and are pensioners and do not have access to electricity, or they don't have the capacity to pay for electricity for the summer.
Dr.
And
for cooling. The time is against us, unfortunately, but thank you so much for coming on the programme. Good to talk to you, Dr. Leni Maravilli.
Thank you.
And the sun is shining on the solar power industry, which we were just talking about just then. It's growing faster than ever, according to the experts. Production has doubled since 2018 and is expected to double again over the next 3 years, meaning prices will keep falling. The world's largest solar energy trade fair has been taking place in Germany, where our correspondent Natalie Carney reports from.
Solar is the most abundant of all renewable energy sources, and its use to produce electricity is increasing at a rapid rate. It may currently only account for a little more than 3.5% of global generation, but the sector itself saw an unprecedented growth of 22% last year, led by China, which produced 3/4 of that, followed by the United States and Europe. The race to reduce deadly CO2 emissions and meet global climate neutrality targets has those in the solar power industry pushing new products and technologies. And all of that was showcased at Intersolar Europe in Munich, the leading trade fair and conference for all things solar energy related.
This show is the first show worldwide that allows you to step on solar panels without producing micro cracks. This is really unique.
Without these shoes, maintenance work is done by removing individual panels or through the use of a crane.
Even the manufacturer for the panels, they are very interested in it, because at the moment they say you're not allowed to walk on the panels.
Be it innovative ideas, higher voltage solar panels, quicker inverter solutions, or increased battery storage, it was all on display by some 1,500 exhibitions from around the world.
You can put maybe 5 to 7 kilowatts worth of solar, so literally you're running your car on free electricity.
The rapidly advancing solar energy industry has led to the expansion of Chinese company Clenergy from a single solar module mounting division to 4 divisions, offering a wide range of products and services for an increasing global clientele.
We just secured about 10 new distributors across from Ireland to Romania, and it's really encouraging to see that technology every year gets better and better. The advancements that has happened in the last decade and a half has just been amazing.
Hundreds of gigawatt hours of solar energy production contracts were signed during the 3-day event, including a 1.5 gigawatt supply framework agreement between China's Longi Solar and Austria's Energy 3000.
According to international energy agencies, we are going in the right direction. There's great optimism that solar power will replace natural gas and coal as the main source of electricity in just the next few years. However, the general overall potential of renewable energies is still quite underdeveloped. That is why Intersolar Europe has been part of a greater trade forum focused on realizing that diverse potential.
Under the umbrella brand, the Smarter E-Europe, events also took place relating to energy storage systems, intelligent energy use in industry and buildings, and electromobility, proving that a complete energy transition away from fossil fuels is possible, with solar energy playing a defining role. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 9 suspects plead not guilty over the migrant boat tragedy, with hundreds of people still missing at sea. We're in Greece next.
day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail. The background.
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken say progress is made during their positive talks in Beijing, putting ties between the world's largest economies on a more stable footing.
Other headlines: China's premier in Germany looking to boost trade with Beijing's biggest European export partner, with Ukraine also on their agenda.
So what challenges lie ahead for Germany's relations with China? I spoke to Jens Eskelund, president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China.
It looks to me like there's a lot of catching up to do. Bilateral engagements and bilateral visits have pretty much been put on hold for 3.5 years during COVID. The opening was Scholz coming to China in November, and that was a very good visit, and we were very happy that it went. And it's great now that Premier Li, he is making a return visit to Germany. It's imperative now that we begin to ramp up these visits between Europe and China again. I think a lot of the misunderstandings we see now is exactly because we have not had the opportunity to engage on these face-to-face meetings. So this is very much to be welcomed.
Let's talk about trade opportunities, because China is a key market for German exporters in particular, from Adidas to Audi. Is that why Li picked Germany for his first trip abroad?
I think that's a part of the explanation, but I think a deeper challenge from a European perspective is that actually Europe is a much bigger market for Chinese goods than China is for European goods. Chinese exports to Europe are 3 times larger than European exports to China. So I'm pretty sure that the question of the imbalance in trade is going to be raised. And I think it's in everybody's interest to make sure that going forward that we achieve some sort of balance in the trade relationship. That will make it much healthier from a long-term perspective.
Germany has talked not about decoupling, but de-risking from China and reducing reliance on certain products and services, like semiconductor chips. And news that Berlin's close to a deal with the US firm Intel is perhaps an indication of that. So what do you think deals like that do to China's relationship with Germany and other EU nations?
I think de-risking is, for many good reasons, becoming a hot topic right now. I still think that the concept of de-risking is not very well understood. Exactly what type of commodities are in scope, what is the size of it. Personally, I don't think it will end up being very big amounts and very wide range of goods. But I think COVID demonstrated to us that it is a risk if you become too critical, dependent on single locations for specific commodities. We saw how much Europe struggled with finding PPE during COVID. We have seen now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine how Europe had been struggling with securing energy. So I think there's a lot of common sense to it here, that you really try to find out where are your big risks, and then you try to address it so you don't come in a situation again where you might be struggling and suffer quite a bit because you are not prepared. I think this is, exercising constant care, that you are preparing yourself for the worst eventuality while still maintaining a healthy relationship with your partners as you would otherwise.
Israeli forces have killed 5 Palestinians, including a 15-year-old, and injured at least 29 other people during raids in the occupied West Bank.
There were violent clashes as Israeli defence forces entered Jenin refugee camp, backed by a military helicopter. Israel says the raids were aimed at arresting Palestinians suspected of attacks. The Palestinian armed group, Islamic Jihad, confirmed it was involved in the clashes. Let's talk to our correspondent, Stephanie Fried, who's in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, what more do we know?
Well, the numbers that are certainly accurate now. 5 people killed on the Palestinian side. One of those, a teenager, according to authorities. Israelis, operatives or soldiers, a combination of soldiers and police, 7 injured in fierce battling that went on for 7 hours. This was gunfighting, explosives used. When undercover agents and an elite paratroop unit and border police on the Israeli side went into Jenin, immediately there was firing on them from the other side, and that's why this went on for 7 hours. For the first time in 20 years, Israel called in a helicopter gunship, and that was to fire on the militants that they say that they were looking for on the Palestinian side, to fire on them as well, to allow their soldiers and police to get out, because 5 Israeli military vehicles were wrecked in this firefight. Dozens and dozens of Palestinians injured also during this fighting. This has brought on condemnation from Egypt, also from Turkey. If you look at the numbers and you include today the casualty figures on the Palestinian side, these recurring Israel raids into the West Bank, more than 110 Palestinians have been killed so far in 2023 in these raids.
Stephanie, this cycle of violence has been ongoing for the last few months. I mean, what do we expect? I mean, are there things going on behind the scenes? How do we expect matters to progress after what's happened over the last 24 hours?
It's tough to know, and this fight back on the Palestinian side in terms of injuring the Israeli soldiers and police that went in, that's perceived in a very strong manner on the Israeli side. Now, what we're hearing is that Israeli, in this right-wing government, the ministers are calling for a broad operation into the West Bank to go in a very broad way. But it's impossible to know because that's also there's pushback against that also from Israeli officials, military officials. So it's impossible to know what will happen, but it seems to be heating up with these recurring raids, the recurring violence, and it seems to certainly today was one of the most violent that we've seen of the recent raids. And again, in addition to Egypt and Turkey, of course, the Palestinian Authority has also condemned Israel for this violence.
Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv, thank you.
9 suspects have pleaded not guilty in Greece to charges relating to the sinking of the overcrowded migrant boat. 2 more bodies have been found. bringing the total of confirmed number of dead to 80. Hundreds of people are still missing, while questions continue to be asked about what the Greek Coast Guard knew and how it responded. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata, where the suspects are being held. Evangelo, what happened in court today?
Well, nothing much, as the 9 who are accused of being traffickers or smugglers appeared in front of a judge, but asked for an extension for another 24 hours as more information about the case have surfaced over the weekend, with more eyewitnesses appearing in front of a judge and the police giving out statements of what happened that day, that boat capsized, taking down 78 people and other hundreds that are still missing. The lawyers had to look over the testimonies of those who witnessed, who were giving out these witnesses over the weekend. They didn't know much about it, so they need more time to be able to go through them. They're going to be appearing in front of a judge on Tuesday morning, sometime between 10 and 11 o'clock local time. Though they did come out to speak to us briefly, they told us that the people who were on the boat, the 9 accused, denied any allegations, any charges, that they indeed were the ones who smuggled. We spoke to one of the lawyers, and this is what they had to tell us.
My client denies the charges. He says he's also a victim of the situation, as he paid a significant amount of money to transfer from Egypt to Italy. He says on the second day, when a ship came close to the boat, smugglers threw all the water and food into the sea. And some witnesses say a day before the boat sank, there was upheaval between different groups because of that lack of food and water. My client told me that the boat sank because most of the people on board shifted from side to side, causing it to capsize.
Well, the rescue and search operation, they recovered actually 2 more bodies just a few hours ago, bringing the death toll up to 80 as we speak right now. And that is allowing the Hellenic Coast Guard to extend the rescue and search operation. It was supposed to end on Sunday, but now will continue through Monday and the next week as well. Though what is in question right now is how they reacted, if they reacted fast enough, and what they did was enough to save the people that are on board. Well, there are reports from eyewitnesses that were on the boat saying that they did throw us rope, they tied our boat, but that rope got caught off twice without them realizing and spinning and speeding off. Now, that's what the eyewitnesses are saying about the Hellenic Coast Guard. There's been a lot of heat of them, of if they did it right and how they reacted. But now we're going to know more, of course, once these 9 suspects will appear in front of a judge on Tuesday and giving more information regarding if the Hellenic Coast Guard did indeed do more and if they are responsible for taking the lives of 70 people and the hundreds that are still missing at sea.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata in Greece.
53 African migrants have been rescued off Gran Canaria. Authorities said they were trying to reach the Spanish mainland in a wooden boat. It comes after a similar boat carrying 38 people was intercepted in the same area on Saturday. More than 10,000 migrants have reached Spain by sea from the African coast so far this year.
UK lawmakers are debating a report which found former Prime Minister Boris Johnson lied to Parliament over Downing Street lockdown parties. Johnson would have faced a 90-day suspension, but he resigned after being given an advance copy of the report, calling the Privileged Committee a kangaroo court. The House of Commons is expected to approve the committee's recommendations, which will make Johnson the first Prime Minister to have been found to have misled Parliament.
Britain's former Prime Minister David Cameron has admitted failings in government health policy in the run-up to COVID-19. Cameron told the official inquiry that it had been a mistake to focus on an influenza-style pandemic and not to consider other diseases, but he denied claims of a wholesale lack of preparedness.
More time was spent on pandemic flu and the dangers of pandemic flu rather than on potential pandemics of other more respiratory diseases like COVID turned out to be. And you know, I think this is so important because so many consequences follow from that. And I've been sort of wrestling with, well,
You're watching CGTN, still ahead, one of the sporting world's most prestigious events. But could Royal Ascot do more to G-up its game on the environment?
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control...
The economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Sea turtles, some of the oldest living reptiles, are at risk from poaching, exploitation and the destruction of their habitat.
Now, a community in Venezuela is taking steps to protect their local population. Our correspondent Mary Trini Mena reports.
A hidden treasure in the heart of the Caribbean Sea, La Sabana, a small coastal town on the Venezuelan mainland. It's a nesting beach for thousands of sea turtles that come each year from March to October to dig pits in the sand and bury their eggs. Braulio Castillo is part of a local environmentalist group taking care of the beach. His job is to patrol 3.7 kilometers of waterfront to locate nesting sites. It's a protected area where the community has built a nursery to hatch eggs in captivity. This season, 12 nests have been recovered, about 800 eggs. And when they're ready, the hatchlings will be released down to the beach into the Caribbean Sea.
If we don't safeguard and protect them, these nests have no chance of survival. Here and on many Caribbean beaches, sea turtles' nests are often plundered and trafficked as food.
4 of the world's 7 species of sea turtle can be found along this Venezuelan coast. The Luz Marina Foundation does its best to keep their hatchlings alive. Pedro Perez, founder of the foundation, keeps close track on the number of turtles coming to the beach, their size and weight, and the number of eggs left behind.
They leave the shell quickly, and then they start cycling around seeking the sound of the sea. Even if you turn their heads in a different direction, they have their animal instinct.
Sea turtles face multiple challenges, from natural predators to man-made dangers like plastic and debris left behind on the beach. Climate change is also affecting their chances of survival, with warmer water causing coral bleaching, leaving fewer places to find food and shelter.
Over the past 18 years, the foundation has been able to save thousands of sea turtles each year. But they are doing more than that. They have been working alongside with the local community to raise awareness about their fragile ecosystem.
At this school, sea turtles are a main subject. The students are eager to learn about them, and the foundation is in charge of teaching basic knowledge about varieties of the species and the importance of caring for their offspring.
Las tortugas pueden desaparecer.
Turtles could disappear like other types of animals. Sea turtles are becoming extinct.
It's also a hands-on experience where the classroom is often the beach. Children carefully look after the nursery. From an early age, they understand that it's everyone's responsibility to preserve the eggs, a lesson that'll stay with them for a lifetime.
If we educate and teach them how they can take care of the turtles and how they can preserve them, they will be better human beings.
Sea turtles are at the core of La Sabana. With hard work, dedication, and above all, environmental awareness, the community is doing what they can to save these marine reptiles. By the end of the year, they hope to have saved at least 2,000 of them. Mari Trinimena, CGTN, La Guaira, Venezuela.
Royal Ascot in England is one of the world's hottest tickets in horse racing, not to mention in the fashion stakes.
But transporting racehorses around the world and tens of thousands of people travelling and shopping comes at a high environmental cost. So this year, organisers are trying to reduce the event's environmental impact. Our correspondent Li Jianhua reports.
Horse racing fans will gather here for a week-long equestrian extravaganza. Racing has been taking place at this site since the early 1700s, the time of Queen Anne, and the Royal Ascot is one of the oldest tournaments of its kind. To lower the event's environmental impacts for the first time, the village enclosure at Royal Ascot will be trialling a net zero carbon emissions area.
We're reusing cups, and this year we'll actually reuse about 500,000 cups. We've taken out that whole waste stream, if you like, but over here we're trialling compostable cups and packaging. So that will go off to a recycling plant that will then produce compost that potentially could come back here and we can use it on the track here or use it within the grounds.
Other measures include generating electricity from solar power, making half the food on the menu plant-based, and collecting more rainwater for use on the track and the grounds. Royal Ascot is well known for its strict dress code and as a playground for dedicated followers of high-end fashion. The late Queen Elizabeth II was a regular. This year, organisers are encouraging attendees to reduce the carbon footprint left by the fashion industry.
For the first time, we've created our lookbook, which is a new take on our style guide, something that people look to every year on how they should dress and represent themselves at the racecourse. And what that really allows us to do is to say to people, perhaps rather than buying a new outfit every year, why don't you mix and match? Why don't you look at what you already have, look at borrowing something and look at mixing the trends a little bit more. So we're absolutely passionate about allowing people to continue to express themselves, but perhaps think about it more mindfully as well.
Royal Ascot has also signed up to the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Principles, with the whole event aiming to achieve net zero by 2040. For 3 centuries, the horse racing event here has been known for its extravagance that captures the essence of British sporting prowess, heritage and fashion. And now the commitment to environmental protection is a positive step forward for Royal Ascot and the wider sporting industry. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Berkshire.
The headlines again. China's President Xi Jinping and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken say progress was made during their positive talks in Beijing, putting ties between the world's largest economies on a more stable footing.
China's premier is in Germany looking to boost trade with Beijing's biggest European export partner. Ukraine's also on the agenda.
And 5 people dead, dozens of others injured. Violent clashes as Israel's military raids Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank.
And that's Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.